In a world filled with stories, some are told because they're entertaining, others because they changed the course of history. But there is one rare story, one that isn't just told, but lived. A story that shaped the world we know today, with all its industry, energy, giant corporations, wealth, and influence. The story of a single man who built an entire system from scratch, a system the world can no longer escape. That man was John Davison Rockefeller. Rockefeller was born in a time when people had no real understanding of modern economic power. The 19th century was witnessing the early sparks of the Industrial Revolution, and the United States was emerging as a rising economic force, yet still drowning in chaos, division, and financial ignorance. In that harsh environment, a young boy grew up in a troubled family. A poor, manipulative father who drifted from town to town, leaving behind stories of deceit, and a deeply religious mother who believed discipline and frugality were sacred virtues. Between these two worlds, John learned cunning from his father, discipline from his mother. Even as a child, John was different. While other kids played outside, he sat at a small table, recording every expense, every penny he spent, in a tiny notebook. No one knew that this little notebook would later become the foundation of an empire the world had never seen before. He believed that order was the key to control, that numbers never lie, and that discipline isn't a choice, it's a way of life. Rockefeller entered the workforce early, working in accounting and learning the secrets of trade, negotiation, and market analysis. By the age of 16, he had already learned the lesson that would define his future. The market isn't a place open to everyone. It's a survival arena where only the strongest, the most organized, and the most perceptive win. But his true opportunity hadn't arrived yet. In the mid-19th century, the world discovered a new substance that changed everything: oil. At first, oil was messy, smelly, difficult to extract, and barely useful. But it quickly became the backbone of energy in a world transforming at a dizzying pace. Rockefeller saw what others couldn't. He saw the future. He saw an empire. He realized oil wouldn't just be a business, it would become the lifeblood of the entire world. Yet Rockefeller didn't enter the oil industry the way everyone else did. While others hunted for oil underground, drilling, gambling, winning once, losing many times, Rockefeller entered through a smarter door: refining. Refining was the most stable, profitable, and least risky part of the industry. Every single barrel of oil had to pass through a refinery. That was the artery no one could bypass. This was where Rockefeller's genius began to take shape. He started buying small refineries, one after another. He didn't use force, he used strategy. He negotiated with precision, offering deals impossible to refuse, or pressure impossible to withstand. With every refinery he acquired, he grew stronger, more efficient, and more capable of controlling the market. He turned chaos into order, randomness into structure, weakness into centralized, unbreakable power. But the moment that reshaped American economic history was his secret railroad deal. While others paid high shipping costs, Rockefeller secured massive hidden discounts that allowed him to sell oil at lower prices, while making more profit than his competitors. In doing so, he built the first true model of a modern monopoly. He was no longer just a businessman. He was the undisputed king of energy. His giant company, Standard Oil, grew from a simple business into an economic beast that controlled 90% of America's oil, a level of dominance the world had never seen. The company owned everything: refineries, pipelines, tanks, contracts, transportation, storage, and even influence over politicians and the press. Rockefeller's power seeped into every corner of American life. Every lamp that lit a home, every train that moved across the country, every factory that roared to life. A portion of the profits from all of it flowed into Rockefeller's pockets. But such immense power triggered a massive wave of fear and anger. The press labeled him a robber baron, and the public accused him of building a monopoly that crushed competition. The government began realizing that this economic giant had grown stronger than the state itself. This was the start of the real war, a war fought not with weapons, but with laws, courts, and political pressure. The government had to step in before the beast consumed the entire economy. And in 1911, the Supreme Court issued a historic decision to break Standard Oil into 34 smaller companies. Everyone thought this was the end of Rockefeller. But the truth, instead of owning one giant company, he now owns shares in 34 rapidly growing corporations whose stock prices skyrocketed. The ruling meant to stop him became the greatest financial reward of his life. He became richer, more influential, and more legendary. But what he did next was even more dangerous. Rockefeller didn't stop at building an oil empire. He started building a new social and economic system. He established universities, educational institutions, research centers, hospitals, philanthropic funds, and scientific foundations. He funded medical research, vaccines, public health programs, and modern education. Some saw this as benevolence. Others saw it as the creation of an elite class that would control knowledge. His influence no longer rested solely on the economy. It extended into health, education, politics, and society. He became part of the world's structure itself. And this brings us to the big question. How could one man lay the foundation for an entire global system? A system that shapes major corporations, consumer behavior, education models, and even our understanding of money? The answer is not simple, but it begins with understanding how Rockefeller viewed the world. To him, the world wasn't just people. It was a giant machine. A machine whose parts must be organized with perfect efficiency. And he positioned himself at the center of its control panel. And that is where the story begins. The system Rockefeller built wasn't an accident, and it wasn't just the natural result of a successful businessman. It was a carefully designed project. A project aimed not only at controlling industry, but at redefining the very meaning of power itself. If you understand this system, you understand the modern world. The world of giant corporations, capital, banks, institutions, and the complex relationship between governments and the economy. When Standard Oil was officially broken up, many people thought that was the biggest victory against monopoly. They thought they had finally killed the beast and that the market was free again, just like it was supposed to be. But what almost no one understood at the time was this. The system Rockefeller built was never dependent on one powerful company. It was built on a connected network of companies, all operating inside the same framework of control and the same way of thinking. The breakup didn't end his influence. It simply spread that power across new entities. But those entities were still under his control through the shares he owned. That's how a new generation of companies was born. Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, and others. These corporations, which became the energy giants of the 20th century, were the direct children of Rockefeller's empire. They came out of the womb of Standard Oil, but they carried the same DNA, the same management style, the same discipline, and the same drive for dominance. And because Rockefeller owned huge stakes in these companies, he stayed at the center of the game. He ran the show from behind the scenes, controlling how these companies moved in the market, even after he stepped away from day-to-day management. This idea, control without being seen, later became a core principle of the modern corporate world. Power no longer needed to sit in an office or give direct orders. All you had to do was own the shares, control the funds, sit on the boards, or provide the financing. And you became the real power. Rockefeller understood this rule long before everyone else, but he didn't stop at the American market. As American oil companies expanded overseas, the empire pushed beyond borders. American oil started shaping the fate of entire nations, affecting their policies, their economies, and their political choices, all because they depended on energy. Rockefeller's influence reached Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America. The world was entering a new phase, a phase where global corporations had more power than many governments. Yet the most dangerous part of Rockefeller's system wasn't oil. It was finance. At the beginning of the 20th century, the American economy was suffering from constant crises, bank failures, chaotic lending, and the absence of any central authority that could stabilize the system. This is where the Rockefeller family stepped into a completely new role. They became part of the push to create a central financial system that could control and manage the market. That's how the Federal Reserve, the U.S. central bank, was born in 1913. Rockefeller wasn't the only force behind it, of course, but his financial and political influence played a very important role in that era. And so, the system that rules the world today, the global financial system built on central banks, became part of the vision shaped by Rockefeller's generation. But the Rockefellers didn't stop at banking. They grew into a real force on Wall Street. They held major stakes in big banks like Chase Manhattan Bank, which later became J.P. Morgan Chase, one of the largest banks in the world. That's how oil power turned into financial power at the heart of one of the biggest economic centers on the planet. As their wealth grew, the Rockefeller family started moving from the world of trade and industry into the world of political, cultural, and social influence. This is where the Rockefeller Foundation appeared, the biggest philanthropic foundation of the 20th century. On the surface, it was created to support science, health, and education. But underneath, it was a tool to quietly reshape the world. For example, the foundation funded medical research that helped wipe out entire diseases. It established colleges and universities that later became part of the global scientific elite. It backed programs to reform and modernize school curricula across the United States. All of this looked humanitarian, but in reality, it expanded the family's power into a new territory: knowledge. Rockefeller understood something crucial. Power doesn't just come from money. Real power comes from shaping minds, directing knowledge, and funding science. Who decides what gets researched and what doesn't? Who chooses which projects get funding and which ones are ignored? Who finances the universities and research centers that train the next generation of experts? The answer is simple. the institutions that
That's how the
control
Rockefeller
money.
Foundation turned from a charity into a central hub for producing and steering knowledge in the modern world. But their influence didn't stop at education. It expanded into politics. One of the most prominent family members, Nelson Rockefeller, became Vice President of the United States. Others entered Congress, governed states, and built networks of influence stretching from New York to Washington, from the military establishment to think tanks and research centers. In the end, the power of this one family stretched across economics, finance, energy, science, health, and politics. This isn't just influence, it's a complete system. And to understand why the world can't escape this system, we need to look at how it actually works. Big corporations have become stronger than many governments. These companies, descendants of Standard Oil, now control energy, technology, food, and finance. Governments may change, but these corporations stay. The global financial system depends on central banks. This model was born in the same era that Rockefeller's influence exploded. Today, banks control the value of your money, inflation, the debt you owe, and even the salary you earn. Educational and health institutions shape entire societies. Many of them are tied to funding, grants, and global initiatives that began in the 20th century. This means Rockefeller's impact isn't just industrial, it's intellectual. Oil is still the backbone of modern civilization. Almost everything depends on it: transportation, manufacturing, electricity, consumer goods, technology, even agriculture. The one who controlled it first helped control the direction of the world for decades. Now the idea of a system you can't escape starts to make sense. Today, you live inside a global economy built on foundations laid by people like Rockefeller. You deal every day with companies born from his legacy. You follow financial policies and economic rules based on theories that rose in his era. You learn in institutions that were shaped by the model he helped spread. Even if you've never heard his name, you are still living inside his system. And still, Rockefeller's legacy isn't purely good or purely evil. It's a complex mix of genius, ambition, monopoly, and influence. Some see him as a builder of modern civilization. Others see him as the architect of a system that can't be broken. But what no one can deny is this: Rockefeller's story is not just the story of one man, it's the story of an entire century. The story of how the world shifted from a simple economy based on trade and agriculture to a gigantic economy built on oil, industry, finance, and technology. And more than 100 years later, the world is still living inside the framework he helped design. Big corporations still rule the markets using the same logic. Central banks still follow the same core principles. Oil is still the king of energy. And financial and industrial power is still the true foundation of global power. So the real question is no longer, how did Rockefeller build this system? The question now is, how did he manage to keep it alive even after his death? How did his family become something deeper than just rich? How did the influence of one man evolve into a global network that shapes the future of entire populations? This is where the final stage of the story begins. A stage that is more complex, more subtle, and far more mysterious. When John D. Rockefeller grew older, the world had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The lamps once lit by kerosene were now lighting entire cities. Trains that ran on coal were now running on liquid fuel. Factories that used to suffer from constant shutdowns were now powered by stable, reliable energy systems. The world changed, but what didn't change was the influence of the man who sparked this transformation. When Rockefeller stepped away from active management, it wasn't the retreat of a defeated man, it was the exit of a victor. He knew the system he built no longer needed his physical presence. It had become self-sustaining, expanding, evolving, and digging deeper on its own. This is the most dangerous kind of system, the system that continues even after its creator disappears. Rockefeller's legacy became a blend of giant corporations, financial institutions, philanthropic organizations, economic policies, educational standards, research centers, and political interests. Every piece carried the imprint of the man who started life with nothing but a small bookkeeping notebook. To understand how the system kept growing after his death, we need to look at three main pillars: energy, money, and knowledge. First, energy, controlling the lifeblood of civilization. Nothing shaped the 20th century more than oil. It was the force that fueled wars, built nations, toppled governments, and turned cities into global powers. After Standard Oil was broken up, new companies emerged, but they all had one thing in common: a management structure and a philosophy inspired by Rockefeller's school of thought. Exxon became one of the world's most powerful oil companies. Chevron expanded into new territories. Mobil entered markets across Asia and Africa. Together, they formed a global oil network, controlling energy supplies in dozens of countries. Even today, when you look at the map of global oil, you can still see the fingerprints of old Standard Oil everywhere. Pipelines, refineries, tankers, transport systems, and middleman companies. The system didn't die, it simply changed shape. Oil became more than a commodity, it became a geopolitical system. And the more important oil became, the stronger the new heirs of that system grew. Major corporations, powerful banks, governments, international alliances, chambers of commerce, think tanks, and economic planning institutions. The world became dependent on energy just as the human body depends on blood. And as long as Rockefeller's system manages that blood, you're a part of it. Second, money, the weapon that rules the world without bullets. Real power in the 20th century wasn't just in industry, it was in money. While oil companies controlled energy, the Rockefeller family planted their roots deep inside the financial system. The clearest example was the merging of their interests with major banking institutions. By the mid-20th century, Chase Manhattan Bank had become a global financial powerhouse. The bank funded infrastructure projects, government debts, and lending policies that shaped the futures of entire continents. Through a network of financial institutions tied to Rockefeller influence, the family became a major player in global markets. Their power transformed from wealth into control of the rules themselves. Who sets interest rates? Who controls liquidity? Who finances governments and corporations? Who determines global investment flows? The answer wasn't a country or a government. It was a complex global financial system whose roots were formed in Rockefeller's era. And then came institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the World Bank, the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR. These institutions influenced the policies of dozens of countries, and many were connected, directly or indirectly, to circles funded or shaped by the Rockefellers. Financial power became part of a global system that no one could easily break or escape. Even strong governments became dependent on this system to fund projects, pay debts, and stabilize their currencies. It's power without an army, yet it can collapse a nation's economy in hours. Third, knowledge, the most dangerous form of influence. Whoever controls knowledge controls the world. Rockefeller understood this early when he founded the University of Chicago, the Rockefeller Foundation, the General Education Board. These weren't ordinary institutions. They were factories for producing a new kind of thought, a new kind of science, a new educational model. They helped advance modern medicine, support vaccine research, establish nursing schools, and reform American education. Over time, their influence spread across the world through university programs, teaching methods, training systems, scientific studies, health policies, research centers. Rockefeller didn't just build corporations. He built generations of scientists, doctors, economists, and political leaders. And this type of influence never disappears. It evolves, and it spreads. The system you can't escape. How it works today. Today, whether you realize it or not, you are part of Rockefeller's network. When you turn on a light, when you start your car, when you pay your electric bill, when you swipe your bank card, when you deal with a bank, when you rely on a global corporation, when you're affected by a worldwide economic decision. You are operating inside the system that began more than 120 years ago. The modern world is built on 4 essential pillars: multinational corporations controlling production, marketing, technology, resources, and even government policies; banks and financial institutions controlling debt, loans, investments, and the direction of the global economy; energy and natural resources, the foundation of modern civilization; knowledge and science, shaping minds, policies, and entire societies. These aren't just sectors. They are the pillars of the global system, each one carrying a direct or indirect legacy of Rockefeller's model. Why can't you escape this system? Because you live inside it. The economy you rely on is built on giant corporations. Your money and salary are tied to central banks. Your energy comes from companies born from Standard Oil's legacy. Your education and healthcare are shaped by global institutions based on Rockefeller-era models. Escaping this system is like trying to escape the air you breathe. It's not an outside force. It's the environment you live in. Was this system a blessing or a curse? It's not a simple answer. A blessing because it created modern progress, cheap energy, massive industries, medical breakthroughs, modern education, strong infrastructure, and a stable financial system. A curse because it created massive inequality, concentrated wealth, corporate power, weakened democratic influence, dominant banks, and blurred